the devil, Lucifer, and Satan. So this will be our first, I guess, in this series, concept of demons. And if we do our historical research, which we eventually in this series will get to the historical references and how these ideas have formed over time, over hundreds of years, even thousands of years. Just like magic. Hello, Divine Ones, Minister Ashley here. I'm a biblical researcher and author. You can check out my books here. The Bible's Hidden Divination and Magic, as well as the journal. I have my I Am That I Am Divine Guidance cards and the Sacred Grail, Women and Goddesses of the Bible. So let's get into this witchy Bible study. But about 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that I was going to start doing Bible studies or research studies, if you will, about the devil, Lucifer, and Satan. So this will be our first, I guess, in this series. And I will start to talk about some of the research regarding demons. As you guys know or may not know, that I do not believe in literal demons. And so this study is to help kick that off. We're going to go into the 3 primary deities that some people correlate to one deity, which will be Satan, Lucifer, and the devil. So these are 3 different entities, okay? And so this is important because if you are going on your deconstruction journey, the greatest fear that they try to implant into your mind and your heart is the fear of the devil, the fear of Satan, the fear of Lucifer. But if we can dispel a lot of these pretty much mythologies, then we can move forward in our spiritual journey. So one thing I do have to mention, especially if I'm going to be mentioning that Lucifer, Satan, and the devil, 3 different archetypes, and these archetypes are related and play out in alchemy, and they play out in astrology. They play out in a lot of different categories, okay? Every Tuesday, I may touch on like a specific archetype known as a demon. So once again, for those that don't know, that not only am I a biblical researcher, but also do not believe in the concept of demons. And if we do our historical research, which we eventually in this series will get to the historical references and how these ideas have formed over time, over hundreds of years, even thousands of years, that these ideas have played out and have shaped because of the storyline. So think about a story that spans for like hundreds and thousands of years. Thank you for the hearts. And so think about that. If a people that the traditional lifespan is of a person is maybe about 60 to 80 years, but they have been in captivity for that amount of time, and of course the culture around them is going to shape their ideologies, and it's going to also shape their storytelling. So if you think about the Babylonian temple period, where they were in bondage in Babylon, and you know, the different places they were in bondage, they're going to take some of those stories and embellish them and also shape them into their storyline. So just keep that in mind. So one other thing I have to mention too is that these are celestial bodies. So when it came to kings and royalty, that they were considered to be the representatives of God. So like the embodiment of a higher deity. So if you think about like the pharaoh would be like the embodiment or the spokesperson of the higher deity. Okay. And so this is no different than in the Bible. So when the kings in the royal court came to say whatever thus say the Lord, not only were the prophets also known to be the mouthpiece of God, but also the literal kings that they eventually anointed to become kings. So like, for example, King Saul was known to be like the mouthpiece of God. Then came King David, and King David is recognized as the son of Yahweh and the chosen to execute God's law and to cast down God's law, if you will. So with that being said, I'm going to start with Lucifer. So Lucifer, how people say the morning star, but Lucifer is the planet Venus. And the reason why it is the planet Venus is because of later with the translation into Latin, that the morning star was translated into Venus. Babylonian exile, the king Tyre, mentioned in Ezekiel 28, and then also in Isaiah describes a king. And here goes the quotation, "O Lucifer, son of the morning star," or either known as the day star. This is mocking the king, and the king was in this esteemed position. And so like they would connect, like if you think about like the astrological movements, how they would name them after different deities. If you know, of course you know that. Okay, so Lucifer being Venus, and Lucifer was casted down. That means that like when Venus was in the highest position, but then eventually it came to like a lower position or either disappeared out of the day sky or out of the night sky, depending on the position of Venus. So if you think about like, if you can't see Venus or you can't see a planet anymore, and it's associated with a literal figure like a king or a queen, the people of that time would say, "Oh, you're like that star in the sky that we no longer see," or "You have fallen from your position." And so it's a form of almost like sympathetic magic. Okay, so Of course, I mentioned sympathetic magic and a lot of other things in my book, The Bible's Hidden Divination and Magic. The king was in this esteemed to that level. In this case, the king of Babylon fell from heaven, meaning that he fell from his esteemed position. The idea of Lucifer being too proud and being casted down. So this king must have been very hardy, must have been a very boisterous, maybe even a mouthy king. But what they were saying in the text is like, okay, so you had all that mouth, but yeah, you were casted down. So another archetype that is lumped together with the devil and Lucifer is Satan. So Satan in astrology would be Saturn. And so I have a video on here about Saturn. And so Saturn, like a lot of times, especially if you look into Greek mythology, that is associated with like a white man with a long gray beard representing like wisdom and authority. However, if you look at ancient texts that, and also with the symbolism that Saturn is a dark-skinned, wise woman, beautiful, wise woman. And so check that video out so you can get the symbolism. So I'm not going to go into that. So Satan was known to be 𝗂𝐴𝑡𝐻, and that's one of Yahweh's agents sent to test the individual. Okay. So if you think about in the New Testament, when Jesus going through, what he going through, like, get behind me, Satan. There's other references in the New Testament, like, get thee behind me, because Satan came to pretty much test the person. One way of how to look at it, if you know about the Elohim, you know about the royal court or the court of gods, that included gods and goddesses within a pantheon. So with that being said, that was Satan's job, to test the people. And so in the Garden of Eden, at the end, when they're kicked out of the garden, there's an angel with a flaming sword at the entry of the garden. So therefore no one else can enter. So like a guardian, if you will, over that realm, the garden, that it houses the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I have several videos about Adam and Eve. Check them out on my main account, on this account. So the same 𝗂𝐴𝑡𝐻 seen in the story of Balaam with the talking donkey. Balaam is headed to give advice to the kings of Moab, to curse the Israelites. And he was going there to also help them. But standing in his way was a 𝗂𝐴𝑡𝐻. And in the path, he was waiting there to unalive him. But the donkey stops in the path because the donkey can see that there is a figure or an angel or some danger in the way. The man, Balaam, continues to beat the donkey. Thank you so much. Continues to beat the donkey, and the donkey starts to talk. And basically the donkey's like, why are you beating me? Because I'm trying to save your life, in short. So I will touch back on these archetypes. This is just a basic introduction into this study. So once again, I'm going to focus on this study every Tuesday. And then we have Feminine Fridays, which I will go into like a goddess or a woman of the Bible or a biblical text. We go with the devil. So the devil is, in astrology, would be Mars. And you know how the devil is always depicted as red. So if you think about the chakras, the base chakra are desires. And so if you think about what the devil represents, it represents like our impulse, our lust, a lot of times with the symbolism, like lust and passion, desire. The Israelites had no character like the devil. None. In their stories, none. But in the book of Enoch, there is a character, and this character's name is Azazel. So if you know about what I've been talking about, Azazel and the ritual of casting the sins off onto like a scapegoat. And so there's 3 different types of scapegoats. So I talk about that in depth. You can check out some of the videos I have here, but also I have like several PDFs in the bio. Sacrificial goats. The high priest would take 2 goats, one unblemished and then one that represented Azazel, that their name is Azazel. And they'll place all the sins onto that one goat. And they would send that goat either off into the desert to carry all the sins away from the people, or either they would, practice several forms of divination to find out the answers from Yahweh, from God. And, I'm not gonna get into those rituals here. Okay. So the closest figure that they have to the devil in the book of Enoch will be Azazel. And he was considered to be a Nephilim. And in some traditions, he was also known to be Lilith's, the son of Lilith. And then in some other traditions, about the angel, the fallen angel, Samael, that they're considered to be one and the same. So just depending on the tradition that you believe in. Azazel teaches humanity forbidden arts such as weapon making and magic. So of course we will get into the forms of magic and divination as I have been, and I've been posting. Long story short, there's no need to fear. There's no devil here. But no, I'm just saying that just to make a lighthearted joke out of the situation, because I tell you, I grew up as a traditional Christian, and some of the things, the horrific things, especially as a child, I would hear, it almost implants that with a bit of psychosis. Like you feel like you could be tempted by a devil, or it could play on you. Now, me being a full-grown adult and being a horror fan and sci-fi, I love this type of stuff. So yeah, I no longer am held captive by those old thoughts. So eventually, like I was saying before, we'll get into more of these archetypes and really pan them out. Like, I really want to do more of a witchy Bible study with these scriptures, like going into the details. Oh yeah, I didn't even, what am I doing? I forgot to mention this. A site that I like to go to that has like the Hebrew, and then they have like the English. It's close to the English, and you click into it and you get more details. It's very juicy. Okay, so I was going over like where Balaam and the talking donkey, and it says, it has the word there, Lord, in the English. But if you know about some of the etymology, that the Lord, it could be Adonai. What do you mean by Lord by that? Or do you mean Elohim? Which Lord are you talking about? So I went to the scripture, and in the Hebrew they have Elohim, and Elohim is plural for God, for gods, but that also relates to like the council of gods. So it's basically saying that Satan is part of the council of gods. Okay, so he is an employee of the Most High. Yeah, in Leviathan, I attended this 3-day conference recently, like maybe about 2 weeks ago. And it was a biblical conference in the book of Genesis. Oh gosh, it was so good. Thankfully, I had the recordings. I'm gonna go back and take some more notes about it. But one of the professors, she was going into the details of Leviathan. She actually has a book. Her name is 𝗟𝐶i h𝗴𝘀𝘀𝐴, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. And she has a book called Guys, Monsters. That's the name of the book. And she talks in depth about like all the monsters, you know, found in the Bible, and as well as Leviathan. And her presentation was on, a good part of it was on Leviathan, and it was good. I got to go back and take more notes.